There comes a moment in life when you realize you weren't just part of someone's story, you were the story, not because you demanded to be, but because your presence carried a weight they couldn't comprehend. You showed up with sincerity, with truth in your hands and loyalty in your actions, offering something rare in a world flooded with pretense, but they didn't see it, or worse, they saw it and took it for granted. What they failed to recognize was that you were not just a blessing, you were the very lesson life sent to wake them up. And life has a way of disguising its hardest teachings in the form of people who love the most and leave the deepest impact. You were the crossroad between who they were and who they had the chance to become, but they chose recklessly, and now the silence you left behind speaks louder than anything you ever said. You didn't lose. You transformed, they're the ones left behind, facing the mirror you became. The dual nature of presence. Not every meaningful presence in someone's life is meant to be permanent. Sometimes your role is far more sacred and far more difficult. You walk into someone's life not because they've earned your goodness, but because your presence holds up a mirror they were never prepared to look into. Your kindness, your honesty, your quiet strength. These aren't just traits. They are catalysts. They awaken what's dormant. They stir what's been buried, but often, they are only truly understood once they are no longer available. We often think of blessings as something people welcome with open arms. But the truth is, blessings often arrive disguised in challenge, wrapped in unfamiliarity, and misunderstood in real time. You were that blessing. You brought healing where there had been chaos. You brought stability to someone who only knew turbulence. You offered loyalty to someone still unsure of their own worth, and because they hadn't yet grown into the maturity required to receive that kind of gift, they mistook it for something ordinary. Or worse, they saw it as something they could bend, manipulate, or delay appreciating until a more convenient time. But there is no later with grace. There is only now. And when someone fumbles something sacred, the loss becomes a teacher. That's the dual nature of presence. You think you're just showing up, being yourself, giving love, offering support. But what you're really doing is giving someone a glimpse of what life could be if they chose differently. And once that glimpse is gone, it doesn't come back. That's when your memory becomes a lesson, not because you wanted it to. Not because you tried to teach anything, but because you were the experience they never knew they needed until it slipped through their fingers. What's often misunderstood is how deeply this affects both people involved. You didn't give with strings. You gave because it's who you are. But even the purest hearts can only give so long before they are emptied. And once you walk away, not in anger but in acceptance, the full weight of your absence begins to settle. It's then that the real lesson begins for them, not because you punished them, not because life is cruel, but because life reveals truth when the noise dies down, when the distractions fade, and when solitude begins to speak. Many people are not prepared to meet someone who lives with integrity. They're used to performance, not authenticity. So when someone like you arrives, honest, consistent, deeply aware, it unsettles the parts of them they haven't faced yet. You don't just love them, you expose them, not deliberately but inevitably. That exposure feels uncomfortable, even threatening, because it demands a kind of inner work they've been postponing. So instead of stepping into growth, they retreat into what's familiar, even if what's familiar is self, sabotage, distance, or indifference. Still, the echo of your presence doesn't fade quietly, it lingers, it shows up in moments of reflection, in late-night thoughts, in future relationships that don't carry the same depth. Your name might not be spoken, but your impact lives on. That's the paradox of being both a blessing and a lesson. You give more than they knew they needed, and in losing you, they receive the one thing life had been trying to deliver all along: awareness. Your story with them may be over, but your role wasn't wasted. You were sent not just for love, but for awakening, and while they may not have honored you when they had you, their path will never be the same because you walked it for a while. You weren't just part of their journey. You were the turning point they didn't see coming. The burden of being the example. There is a quiet weight that comes with being the one who gave their best and still wasn't chosen with care. It's the burden of being the example, of being the one people only learn to value after the moment to keep you has passed. It's not a role you asked for, but one that life often gives to those who live with honesty, consistency, and heart. While others take shortcuts or hide behind masks, you showed up in full. And in doing so, you unknowingly became the measure they will use to compare everyone else to, long after you've gone. When you carry truth in your spirit, you naturally shine light into places others are still trying to keep in shadow. You don't try to expose people, but your presence makes it harder for them to stay asleep in their own patterns. You love with depth, you speak with clarity, you listen with sincerity, and for someone who has never encountered that level of wholeness, it can be overwhelming. They admire it, yet feel unworthy of it. They want it, yet fear what it demands of them, because the truth is, being loved by someone real changes you. It challenges the stories you tell yourself about what you deserve. It breaks the cycle of half-hearted connections and opens up the possibility of something better. But not everyone is ready for better. Some are still attached to the comfort of familiar dysfunction. Some haven't yet built the emotional foundation required to hold what you were willing to give. So what do? Often they mishandle it, not with obvious cruelty, but with avoidance, delay, excuses, or indifference. And you're left wondering how someone could be so close to something sacred and still choose to walk away. What you may not realize in that moment is that you weren't just someone who passed through. They will carry your influence with them for years to come, not as regret alone, but as a reference point. You became the standard by which future relationships will be measured. And not out of pride, but because the impact of someone who gives deeply is not erased by time. It is intensified by distance. It is a strange kind of pain to be the one who helps someone grow, knowing they may only recognize your value once you are gone. It feels unfair, it feels exhausting, but it is also part of a deeper truth. Growth often begins with loss. Sometimes your departure is what activates their transformation. Your silence becomes their turning point. And your absence becomes the first time they truly hear the lesson life tried to teach them while you were still present. Being the example doesn't mean you're better. It doesn't mean you're perfect. It means you lived in a way that challenged someone to rise above who they were. You didn't demand change, you embodied it, and that embodiment forced them to confront what they were avoiding. It's not a role that comes with applause or recognition. In fact, it often ends in solitude, but it is also a deeply meaningful calling. You were never meant to beg for a place in someone's life. You were meant to reflect what is possible when love is sincere and grounded. And if they couldn't rise to meet that standard, it doesn't diminish your worth. It simply means your chapter in their life was about awakening, not permanence. So while they may call it a mistake, while they may look back and wish they had seen clearly, know this: you were the lesson wrapped in kindness, the wake-up call disguised as affection. You didn't fail them. You elevated them, and in time they will understand the cost of mishandling something that real. When goodness meets immaturity, there's a deep and often painful lesson that unfolds when your goodness meets someone else's immaturity. You may have offered your time, your love, your care, believing that what you brought into their life would be received with gratitude and reciprocated with respect. But immaturity doesn't recognize value in real time. It often confuses patience for weakness, kindness for naivety, and emotional presence for something ordinary. Immaturity isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it hides behind charm, behind grand words, behind moments that feel meaningful. But when the weight of real responsibility and emotional accountability enters the room, that's when immaturity reveals itself. It's not always malicious. Often it's unaware. People who have not yet done the inner work to grow emotionally will misread genuine love. They may even reject it, not because it's wrong, but because it demands a version of them they haven't yet developed. When you love from a place of stability and clarity, you bring something sacred. But to someone who hasn't yet learned to sit with their own emotions, to communicate honestly, or to treat connection with care, your love becomes uncomfortable. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because you unknowingly illuminate everything they have yet to confront in themselves. You reflect back to them a standard they are not prepared to meet, and instead of rising to it, they often distance themselves, pull back, or sabotage the very thing they once claimed to want. This dynamic is heartbreaking because it leaves you questioning yourself. You wonder if you expected too much, gave too freely, or saw something that wasn't really there. But the truth is, you didn't ask for too much. You simply offered something that required growth, and not everyone is ready to grow. Some people meet a kind soul and don't know what to do with it. They're used to inconsistency, to emotional games, to relationships that don't require depth. So when they find someone who is emotionally present, they might confuse that presence for pressure, and instead of leaning in, they retreat. What makes this even more difficult is that you often see the potential in them. You see who they could become if they allowed themselves to evolve. That vision pulls at your heart. But potential is not a promise. It's not enough to see what's possible. Someone must be willing to do the work to become it. And when they choose not to, when they resist that growth, you're left carrying the emotional cost of believing in someone more than they believed in themselves. The pain of this isn't just about rejection. It's about watching someone walk away from what could have healed them. It's about seeing someone trade something real for the comfort of emotional shortcuts. But over time, you begin to understand that your role was never to fix, convince, or wait endlessly. Your role was to bring truth, and when that truth collided with their unreadiness, it created a tension they weren't prepared to face. In time, many of them will look back. They'll realize what they lost when they didn't protect what was good. But by then, your life will have moved forward. Your heart will have healed in new spaces with people who can meet you where you are. You'll stop blaming yourself for their unpreparedness, and you'll begin to see that even your pain had purpose. When goodness meets immaturity, it rarely ends in harmony, but it does end in revelation. You learn who you are, what you deserve, and how to protect your peace, and they learn eventually that not everyone shows up twice. You were the moment that invited them into a better version of themselves. Whether they answered that invitation is on them, but you walked away with your integrity intact, and that's a victory time cannot take from you. From pain to purpose, there's a quiet transformation that takes place after the hurt. At first, the pain is sharp. It's confusing, unfair, and deeply personal. You replay conversations in your head, question your worth, and wonder how someone could take something so genuine and respond with silence, distance, or disregard. But time, when paired with reflection, has a way of reshaping that pain into something far more powerful: purpose. In the beginning, you may feel broken. That's natural. When you love with intention and it isn't met with the same energy, it creates a wound. But what you don't realize in those early moments is that the wound doesn't end you. It begins something else. It opens the door to a deeper understanding of who you are, what you carry, and why your heart has always been set apart. Pain teaches in ways comfort never could. It shows you where your boundaries were too soft, where your expectations were shaped by hope rather than reality, and where you confused someone's potential with their willingness. Through that clarity, you grow. Slowly, your energy shifts. You no longer seek closure from others because you begin to find it within. You realize that peace doesn't come from their apology. It comes from your own decision to let go. This is the turning point, the place where the hurt begins to serve you. You stop asking why it happened and start asking what it's here to teach. That shift is where your purpose is born. Suddenly, your voice carries more strength. Your choices come from a place of wisdom rather than longing. The very thing that tried to break you becomes the foundation you stand on. It's never easy to make peace with betrayal or emotional loss, especially when your intentions were sincere. But healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means reclaiming. You take back the energy that was misused. You redirect it toward your goals, your growth, and the people who show up with the same heart you offer. The past doesn't disappear, but it loses its control over your identity. And here's the irony: the one who hurt you may never fully understand the depth of what they did. But their actions unintentionally awakened a version of you that's more grounded, more self-aware, and more aligned with your truth. That's the hidden gift in it all. The pain didn't just end a chapter, it rewrote the story. Purpose doesn't always arrive wrapped in joy. Sometimes it's hidden in heartbreak. But once it's revealed, you start to see everything differently. You carry yourself differently. You speak from experience, not just emotion. And your life begins to reflect the strength you never knew you had until you had no other choice but to stand in it. So yes, the pain hurt deeply, but it also built you, and now your life no longer revolves around what left. It revolves around what remains, and what you've built from the ashes. The inevitable reckoning: there comes a time when what was once dismissed is remembered with clarity, not because someone told them to remember, but because life has a way of circling back to the very moments we thought we had escaped. This is the reckoning, not out of revenge, not through cruelty, but through the quiet unfolding of truth that cannot be denied forever. People often believe they can walk away from what they're not ready to face. They convince themselves they made the right choice, that nothing meaningful was lost. But time has a different rhythm. It doesn't move on just because someone wants it to. Instead, it reveals things slowly, through experiences, through silence, through unmet needs that once were fulfilled but are now gone. Eventually, the patterns repeat, the distractions fade, and in the stillness, they start to remember the one who saw them clearly, the one who showed up when they were uncertain, who stayed when things were complicated, who gave without keeping score. At first, it may come as a quiet thought, a name that crosses the mind unexpectedly. But soon, it becomes a presence that lingers, a voice that echoes in the choices they now regret. This is the moment when the past is no longer just a memory. It becomes a mirror. They begin to see where they faltered, where they misunderstood love, and where they turned away from something rare. And this realization is not easy. It doesn't come with comfort. It comes with weight, because now they recognize the cost, not just of losing you, but of not becoming the person they needed to be in order to keep someone like you. The reckoning is never about punishment. It's about awareness. It's about finally understanding what they couldn't see before. It's not something forced upon them. It rises naturally from the space your absence left behind. And in that space, they begin to ask the questions they avoided. Why did they push away what was pure? Why did they choose ease over effort, distance over depth, pride over peace? These realizations come with humility. And sometimes they come too late, because by the time someone understands your worth, you've already learned how to live without their recognition. You've already healed, grown, and redefined what love means on your own terms. You've built a life not around what you lost, but around what you found in yourself after the loss. The reckoning then becomes theirs to carry, not out of vengeance, but out of truth. It's the natural return of consequences that follow choices. And while you no longer seek their validation or remorse, you know deep down that what you brought into their life left an imprint, one that time cannot erase. Let them remember, let life teach. You no longer need to explain who you were. Your absence has already done the talking, and now the chapter closes, not with anger, but with resolution. You were the blessing they couldn't hold, and now they live with the lesson they didn't expect to learn.